So who read that first edition of Sense and Sensibility? Although 750 copies were sold in the next couple of years, there aren't many clues about who actually bought it. But luckily, there are letters from one woman, Countess Bessborough, that prove that Sense and Sensibility was read with pleasure in this house. Althorpe is the breathtaking Northamptonshire home of the Spencer family. I went to meet Earl Spencer to talk to him about his Regency relative, Lady Bessborough, who wrote to a friend, "Have you read Sense and Sensibility? It is a clever novel. They were full of it at Althorpe."
Well, Lady Bessborough is actually the lady in the middle of the portrait there, and she's one of the three Spencers of that generation. The most famous one being the one on the left, her sister, Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire. And Harriet was very much her handmaiden and companion. And we know she was great fun, very, very amiable, lovely, bright, sparkly person, Harriet, and intensely loyal.
I imagine this kind of group of toffs sitting around reading, perhaps reading aloud. Have you any sense of how the reading was done in a room like this?
I have. I mean, I know from the diary entries from my family at the time that reading was taken incredibly seriously. Lady Bessborough and her family, when they lived here, when they came here, it was a buzzing, fizzing place of new ideas. You know, this was not some stuffy aristocratic outpost. This was a salon with a crackling atmosphere of intellect and discovery.
Lady Bessborough notoriously had a long affair with a much younger man who then married her niece. You know, this is quite racy behaviour. So I wonder how they regard the proprieties, really, of a novel like Sense and Sensibility.
Well, Lady Bessborough did have a racy love life, but I think that, you know, you can have an unconventional love life and still appreciate the more formal settings of Jane Austen's novels and the part of romance and marriage and social advancement in them.
I think there must be a strong possibility that the women in the family sympathised with Marianne, because though they're aristocratic women, they still have very constrained choices. So I think they could really engage with a novel which is about limited options.
I think the fact that Lady Bessborough and her sister were aristocrats is sort of less important than their gender. Yes. Yeah. Lady Bessborough and her sister were both paired off with incredibly eligible men who they didn't like or love. And so the whole business of marriage and of allying marriage with social class, they would have understood that very, very keenly.
In the time of Jane Austen, courtship was the defining test in the life of a young woman. But she was supposed to be passive and self-controlled. So how could she find out whether a man was worthy? Austen nails the desperate torment of that struggle with masterful understatement.
Marianne, only half-dressed, was kneeling against one of the window seats for the sake of all the little light she could command from it, and writing as fast as a continual flow of tears would permit her. In this situation, Eleanor, roused from sleep by her agitation and sobs, first perceived her, and after observing her for a few moments with silent anxiety, said in a tone of the most considerate gentleness, "Marianne, may I ask?" "No, Eleanor," she replied. "Ask nothing. You will soon know all." The sort of desperate calmness with which this was said lasted no longer than while she spoke, and was immediately followed by a return of the same excessive affliction. It was some minutes before she could go on with her letter, and the frequent bursts of grief which still obliged her, at intervals, to withhold her pen, were proofs enough of her feeling how more than probable it was that she was writing for the last time to Willoughby.
The story of Marianne and Eleanor and their broken hearts was appreciated by an audience well beyond the libraries of the aristocracy. Books were expensive, but thanks to the popular circulating libraries, Austen's novels also made their way into the hands of a wider public. So how successful was she?
I would say that by the standards of Jane Austen's day, in her own lifetime, in that very short period of 6 years between her first published novel and her death, she's really very successful.
Oh, you think?
Oh, absolutely. She publishes her first novel, Sense and Sensibility, at her own expense. And that means she gets the profits from it. And she earns £250 from Sense and Sensibility. And, you don't actually have to even compare it to other writers' earnings. This is at a time where perhaps the income for a professional gentleman who's doing quite well might be £500 a year. So that's a really substantial sum of money.
Her literary career taking off, Austen published 3 more novels in quick succession. Pride and Prejudice in 1813, Mansfield Park in 1814, and Emma in 1815. But before she could see her last 2 manuscripts in print, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion, her health began to fail. In 1817, Jane died in her sister's arms at the age of only 41. She was buried here in the splendour of Winchester Cathedral. But don't get the wrong idea. This was no grand farewell. Whatever success Austen had enjoyed was certainly not translated into public recognition. Her early morning funeral was discreet and sparsely attended. This is her grave. Doesn't stand on it. She's actually buried beneath here in memory of Jane Austen, younger daughter of the late George Austen of Steventon. What's she remembered for? She's remembered as a daughter, as a true Christian, for the benevolence of her heart, the sweetness of her temper, and the extraordinary endowments of her mind. But that's it. Nothing of her great novels. So it seems at the very moment of her death, her great achievement and her fragile prestige as a writer is going to perish with her. Within 3 years of her death, Austen had fallen out of fashion and out of print, and unsold copies of her stories of polite rural society were sold off by the publishers at knockdown prices. So what on earth happened? Well, the main culprit was Romanticism. Literary fashion was turning against the drawing room. By the 1840s, it was dramatic landscapes and wide horizons, fiery desire and rebellion that set the pulses racing. And no woman captured humid passion on the page quite like Charlotte Bronte. As a northern schoolgirl, there was absolutely no escaping the Brontes. We were forever here in Haworth Parsonage on the coach. It was always raining. But somehow this kind of gloomy, poky parsonage and the idea of the 3 sisters writing and dying seemed designed to appeal to the teenage imagination. Bronte is as deeply associated with Yorkshire and gloom and rain and moors as Jane Austen is with Hampshire and sunshine. And Charlotte was certainly no Jane Austen fan. She complained in letters to her friends.
The passions are perfectly unknown to her. I should hardly like to live with her ladies and gentlemen in their elegant but confined houses.
Lucasta Miller is a Bronte expert, and I wondered if she could explain Charlotte's attitude to Austen.
I think it just suggests that Austen just wasn't hugely popular in the 1820s and 30s when Charlotte Bronte was sort of, as it were, doing her apprenticeship as a writer. I mean, she was a hugely voracious reader, but what she was reading was stuff that was completely opposed to the Austen sensibility.
Is it just that the Brontes found Austen too sensible and suitable?
Yeah, but it's much more than that. I think Bronte thought that Austen was in denial about human psychology. I mean, Bronte, you know, the sex instinct and the death instinct are the things that you get in the Bronte novels. They're sort of, you know, pulling them right up to the surface. And Bronte thought that Austen was shallow, prim, superficial, sort of averting her eyes from the truth about human nature.
I would say that's a really unfair caricature of Austen, because there's just as much pain and suffering, disinheritance, poverty, outsiders and depression there as there is in any Bronte novel. But clearly there's something lacking as far as romantic readers are concerned. So what is it?
Yeah, I think it's the individualism of Jane Eyre or indeed Wuthering Heights, the idea of the romantic outsider, the romantic rebel.
Well, Austen's heroines may not have been rebels, but they still endured heartbreak and desire. And where Bronte loves hysteria, Austen prefers smiling irony.
Dear Miss Morland, consider the dreadful nature of the suspicions you have entertained. What have you been judging from? Remember the country and the age in which we live. Remember that we are English, that we are Christians.
30 years earlier, Austen mocked overheated Gothic fiction in her novel Northanger Abbey. You can feel her smirking when her hero chides the heroine for entertaining cliched fantasies about spooky houses, locked rooms and dirty deeds.
Consult your own understanding, your own sense of the probable, your own observation of what is passing around you. Dearest Miss Morland, what ideas have you been entertaining?
In the decades after her death, Austen was a background figure in the literary landscape, outshone by the unbridled Brontes, the medieval romances of Sir Walter Scott, as well as the social panoramas of Thackeray, Gaskell and Dickens. But by the middle of the 19th century, Austen was back in print, thanks to a new Victorian invention. The advent of rail travel re-engineered the shape of the nation and the speed of life. Quite unexpectedly, it also created a captive new audience for books. In 1848, William Henry Smith and Sons, W.H. Smiths, opened their very first railway bookshop here at Euston. So if you were off on your travels, you could nip into the bookshop and pick up a copy from their railway library. These very cheap and often garish editions were known as yellowbacks. The inclusion of Austen among the early yellowbacks on the shelves of Smiths was largely due to the fact her titles had recently fallen out of copyright. Nevertheless, it was these low-price, popular editions which introduced Austen for the first time to a mass audience.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife.
However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighbourhood,
this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families
that he is considered as the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters.